There are two shapes I want to focus on today. First is Dover from 1965, and the second one is Early American. This was actually made prior in 1963, but that's not going to be the focus of this video simply because this line is so very hard to find. Technically, I should have put it in the other video with Orbit, because if we go in order by Vincent Broomhall shapes, it would be Orbit, and then, let's see, American, which is the translucent fine china that was covered in the Triumph video, and then this one, Early American. But we're going to come back to this in a moment because, as you see, there's some shared treatments between Dover and Early American. Now, Dover is very easy to find. It was first produced in 1965. It was made into the 1980s. It has a roughly 20-year production run. So we're going to look at the assortment first. And we have a glossy 8x10 photo here showing the full assortment of Dover. A couple things to note. Shakers and the butter dish were made for Dover. Ordinarily they would be picked up like from Jubilee or Orbit. We also have a jumbo salad bowl with a wooden fork and spoon, and we have a jumbo salad to look at. There's also a soup tureen with a plastic ladle. And we had not seen a soup tureen since the Republic shape from 1915, so that after 50 years we finally have a soup tureen again in the Homer Laughlin line. And we have a soup tureen here. I don't have a ladle to show you, but that is the White Dover soup tureen. Another thing about Dover, its name. Now, Dover is the original name for this shape. However, it's also called Colonial. It's also called Colonial White. There are some retailers who changed it to called Plymouth. If we look at the treatment list, or partial list, from 1978, we see that the treatments are all prefixed with CW, which stands for Colonial White, and the shape they call it Colonial. So Dover is not even really used on this treatment list. But Dover is its official name. That's how it started out. So if you hear me say Colonial White or White Dover or any of those other terms, they're all interchangeable. Now, another thing about Dover, this was sold as a supermarket promotion. We saw that with the Orbit shape and the Morocco. We saw it with the Dresden line, the variant of Virginia Rose, and also with Victoria, Sheffield Bone White. In this case, Business Incentives sold it as White Dover. So it'd be just the plain undecorated whiteware. And whenever you had a customer like Business Incentives or JH International, they were responsible for all those Sheffield lines. They want a full assortment. That's why you have these extra pieces like the jumbo salad and this terrine, because they want to keep the supermarket promotion going as long as possible. So another thing to look at with Dover are all the different glazes. So you see solid colored glazes here. And what happens is, since this was produced for such a long period of time, any shape that comes along that gets a new glaze, it always seems to make its way onto Dover. So you have this olive green glaze here that we're going to see that first comes on let me think for a second. Yeah, Hearthside. It's the Bravado glaze, and it makes its way on to Dover. We have Harlequin Yellow from the reissue Harlequin line of the late 1970s. It's on Dover. We also have the reissue Harlequin Green glaze from the late 1970s. Oddly enough, we have a piece of Fiesta Red on Dover. And we could just keep on going. There's Sandstone. I believe this began with Challenger. Again, makes its way onto Dover. This is Amberstone that you would see on Fiesta Amberstone or Sheffield Amberstone. Makes its way on Dover. So another thing about these glazes that we will look at more as we go on to other shapes is that they have a very transparent look to them, and that's so that the underglaze stamps can show up. So we'll look at a couple treatments real quick. This is Homespun. This is Bayberry, which we're going to look at more in a moment. Tulip in the back. Let's see. That one I think is Milano Gold. And that's Dover Rose. Canterbury. And Madrid. That's a pretty popular or easy to find pattern. A lot of people, they kind of cringe when they look at the 70s dinnerware with the olive green and the golden browns and the oranges and the the yellows and all these Mediterranean type Spanish underglaze stamps. I kind of like them because I kind of remember them being a kid growing up in the 70s. This is All Seasons. Well, growing up in Newell, we had a store called Value King, and I remember All Seasons being sold. And then the Christmas holly. So those are just a few of the patterns found on Dover. We've got a couple more promotions here. Here's All Seasons again with the treatment number CW120. There's Madrid, which we saw over here in the olive green Bravado glaze. This is one I've never seen in person that I'd like to find. It's gingham. It's this plaid treatment, CW119. And a little promotional pamphlet, Homer Laughlin China Patriot Collection, All Seasons, CW120. And you open it up and you see Patriot Collection Colonial White Ironstone. And there's your Dover assortment. No salad bowl and no platter in this assortment. So now we'll look at this early American shape I talked about a moment ago. That, as I said, this is very difficult to find. And we have some pieces. This is Bayberry. So this is very common on white Dover, or colonial white, whichever you want to call it. And the only pieces I've been able to find are this beverage server, and this, I believe I got this in a trade with Mark LeCain. And then there's Undecorated Blank. You will also find some pieces of this early American shape that were picked up to go with a Loving Kindness series, which is some giftware that was made for C.R. Gibson in the early 1980s. And each piece has a different biblical verse on it. So that's just a little bit about early American and Dover. Most of your Dover pieces are not going to be marked. Sometimes the plates will have a date code. We look at, let's see, this bicentennial plate. And this is another thing, that this shape, because of its colonial look, became so popular in the late 1970s. And this one comes from 1976. So there's just a general Homer Laughlin mark on this. Sometimes you'll find pieces that are marked with a white Dover back stamp, but most often they're not going to be marked at all, which is pretty common, especially for the smaller pieces. So I think that's going to be it for today for Dover and early American Vincent Broomhall shapes. We're still in Vincent Broomhall. We're going to be looking at more of his shapes. We got probably about 4 or 5 more Vincent Broomhall videos to go, and then Dennis Newberry, and then we'll be